What is up, and welcome into the block. I've got my guys, Carl Reed, Blake Brockermeyer, here ready to talk some college ball, getting ready to close out the week strong. Before we do, you at home, like, share, subscribe, continue to get us out there as we build the block from the ground up and prepare for the 2022 season. We're still preparing for the 2022 season, but we're also preparing for the changing landscape in college football, guys. And speaking of that, the transfer portal is a pretty popular topic. So the NCAA has officially released its decision to table the unlimited transfers rule change, and it's also delayed the implementation of transfer portal windows throughout the college football calendar. Now, there was a direct quote from University of Georgia president and board chairman Jer Moorhead that said, essentially, quote, many of us have concerns about the impact that name, image, and likeness is having on the transfer process, and we want further analysis on that issue and its potential impact on graduation rates before taking action, end quote. Now, there's even been some talk about potential legislation in the Senate that be creating a baseline rule relating to NIL in college football. Long story short, anything related to the transfer portal and all of that stuff is being tabled for now because everyone in the sport wants to know more about how name, image, and likeness might impact it. Carl, going to you first, how do you react to all of this, and are we on the right path with this in mind?
I think that right now we all recognize that something needs to be done, but we can't quite figure out what that something is. Anytime you have a rule in place like the transfer portal, there are unintended consequences. The purpose of the portal was for guys who weren't playing a lot or who were disgruntled a little bit to get an opportunity and play right away without having to sit out. It was not intended for guys to shop for the highest bidder for NIL money. And since that has started to happen, I think that has made some people in the game uneasy. I do like the transfer portal, but I do think that we need certain things in place to kind of keep things together and for programs to not be kicked off the rails a little bit. I think guys should have to finish their season to be immediately eligible going somewhere else. And I don't think guys should be able to transfer multiple times. You shouldn't be able to flip schools season after season. At some point, you'd have to get it settled in. I even personally would like to see kids having to stay on campus for 2 seasons before they are allowed to transfer, because you have to be able to go through some adversity and see if the situation works. We shouldn't be letting them bail at the first sign of resistance. So I think some things need to be tweaked, and hopefully we get some order to this as soon as possible.
Isn't it amazing the chaos that this has caused? I mean, the whole portal and NIL stuff has really changed the landscape of college football quickly. I agree with Carl. I think you should only be able to transfer once until you graduate. It's such a nightmare for the personnel directors and colleges to figure out the roster that they have. Implementing the 85 scholarship window where they can keep 85 players all the time on scholarships going to help a ton, because managing your roster is so critical now in college football, because you got to know what you're going to have. I like the idea of having a couple of windows where players can enter. I think just creating an environment where you can just quit in the middle of the season is bad for college athletics. These kids need to learn adversity. Things aren't always going to go your way. All these players aren't going to step on campus and be an instant impact starter, their first day there. There's a process that comes along with it. And I'd like to see that happen at some point. But the windows can be small. If you're playing for a national championship or you're in the playoffs, your window is very small to leave after the season. So I can see how that could be an issue. But I personally would like to see the window be after spring football. I think if you created a window in the summer where you had maybe 6 weeks or so to enter the portal. It would cause players to stay there for a year, where they had to play and compete and grow as not only football players or athletes, but just academically and just be part of the general college experience. I think would benefit these athletes.
And I think that the guys have to understand that what's stopping any great player that had a great season with NIL to come back and want to go to the highest bidder. When you hear guys like Jordan Addison were offered millions of dollars and he was doing just fine at Pitt, it is going to make players want to go down that road. So we have to get a full scope of it. We have to get the rules in place, but it's going to be interesting to see what is decided on in the end.
Well, one thing's for sure is the smart college football programs or smart athletic programs are going to figure out to bend every single rule that's out there in their favor. And so those are the kind of teams that are going to quickly ascend in the recruiting and in the portal. And so you've got to come up with some sort of, rules across the board where teams are playing on an equal playing field. I think if there's a way that you could give these athletes an equal percentage of the revenue the NCAA is generating off of their sport, that might be a solution to it. But it's a very complicated deal, and with the genie out of the bag now, I think it's going to be a long time until there's rules in place where people are playing on equal playing fields.
And I would still caution a lot of these players, because there's going to be guys, and we're going to see it this season, guys that left the school where they had an opportunity to develop and they go somewhere else and they end up not starting. So if you're not starting at one place and then you transfer and go to another place and not start, the answer is not to give that kid a free transfer to another place. The answer is to start to make him realize that he might not be as good of a football player as he thinks, and he needs to start focusing on his education as well.
This discussion should likely come back up later this month. Now, I want to transition because we had a discussion earlier in the week that was very interesting. Obviously, Brad Crawford projected the first AP top 25 for the 2022 season. But before we started talking about it off the air, Blake made a really good point. Group of 5 teams have a much higher bar to clear to even be considered for some of these polls, yet several of them will probably be on the list towards the end of the year. So Blake, I want to go back to you for this. When you look at that projected AP top 25 and you consider the group of 5 or lack thereof, what's your largest takeaway here?
Well, the big takeaway is that there's very little respect for these programs. The only way for these programs to ascend the rankings and do what Cincinnati did last year is you have to prove for 2 seasons that you are that team that can do it. There's no team in the group of 5 this season that's going to come out of the 20 to 25th ranked team and it's going to end up playing in a New Year's Day bowl. I mean, that's just not the way it works. They're going to have to show that they can do it this year and next year to be able to get that respect. And that's just the way it is. It's not a great deal for these schools. Some of these schools have very good teams, but there's just very little respect. They have to win an inordinate amount of games to even be considered for the polls if they're not in it at the beginning of the season. And then if you notice, let's just say Houston's in the 20 to 25th range beginning of the season. Houston's going to have to rattle off like 3 or 4 or 5 wins in a row to move up and inside the top 20, because these teams that are in front of them, they'll leapfrog them and they're not going to move back as quickly. So just very little respect. You have to prove it for 2 years. UCF did it a couple of years ago. Cincinnati did a great job last year, had a very good team and proved it. And so it'll happen again, but the playing field is not equal for these teams.
Well, guys, I think there's levels to it, and I don't think the playing field is equal either, but I wouldn't call it disrespect. The best teams in the Power 5 are better than the best group of 5 teams. And that has continuously been proven on the field over and over again. Cincinnati got a shot and they didn't belong on the field with Alabama. They're not deep enough. They don't have the same caliber of talent. Boise State had an incredible run under a couple of coaches led by Chris Peterson, and they knocked off Oklahoma. I think that was back in 07. They knocked off Oklahoma, and they were the darlings of it. But we all know that there's a different level between the Power 5 conferences, the SEC, the Big Ten, and the guys that are playing in the Sun Belt and the MAC and the Mountain West and the American Conference. It's just a different ball game. The recruiting budgets are bigger. They're getting the cream of the crop when it comes to players. I do think now with the transfer portal that the group of 5 has an opportunity to close the gap on talent a little bit if the right guy can hit it and get the right combination of players, because there's great players going to be transferring from Power 5 every year down in order to play. But I don't think those schools are getting disrespected. I think a lot of sports fans want college football to be like college basketball, where you see teams upset people in the NCAA tournament. Football is not that kind of game. 9 times out of 10, the bigger school at the Power 5 level is going to win those matchups on the field. It's like Bill Parcells used to always say, if there was no such thing as size, we wouldn't need weight classes in boxing. And it's no different between the Power 5 and the Group of 5.
Yeah, I mean, the better solution to me is have the Group of 5 team have their own playoff system. I think that would be a really interesting thing to see and watch. I think college football fans would love to see that. I think what bothers me the most is when you see a team in the Group of 5 that's 8-1, 8-2, and then you see a team that's a bottom tier Big 12 team or Pac-12 or SEC team that's 4-4 or 5-3, and they're ranked ahead of some of these teams. Even though if they played on the field, I think some of these games would be close. That's to me not a fair system for some of these teams that have excelled and put together pretty good teams, but you never really know how they would do unless they played on the field. And then there's the only way to do that is in a bowl game.
Blake, let me ask you a question real quick. You're a Texas guy, Texas high school guy as well. Do you think that the small school state champion in Texas can beat Austin Westlake if they were to play each other?
No. But you're not, that's not even close. That's not even a close comparison. I mean, comparing a 1A, you're talking like a 1A or 2A school?
1A or 2A.
Yeah, that's not even close. I mean, the balance between the G5 and let's just say a middle tier Big 12 team is not that significant in my opinion. I mean, the top tier teams, yes. I mean, those teams are much, much better and more talented with more depth. But if you've got a really good G5 team and you're playing a middle tier Big 12 or Pac-12 or even maybe a middle to bottom tier SEC team, like it's going to be a competitive game.
I would say it's probably more on the level of like a 6A school in Texas to maybe a 4A if we're talking 2 really good teams. But that was also a classic moment here on the show. I'd also say really quick, I think a fascinating case study in relation to this is going to be what level of respect or higher level of respect that the incoming Group of 5 schools will get once they arrive in the Big 12. Cincinnati, Houston, UCF, BYU. If they start climbing into the ranks a little bit more just because they have that logo next to their name, then boom, we prove Blake Brockermeyer's theory right here on the block. Right?
Oh, they 100% will. The second they enter the Big 12, they will be ranked in the top 25 and much more often, assuming that they have, continue their programs continue on the right track.
Hey, who knows too, if the Big 12 suddenly becomes another super conference, then you got to put them in there, right? If we're talking super being next to that conference's name. Anyway, let's talk about some superstar freshmen or potential for that part. We are going to now project some of the more exciting 2022 freshman impact players. And guys, look, we've done a lot of stuff like this on the show. We had our freshman impact draft a while back, and it was a big hit. So what I'm going to ask you to do is to highlight some freshmen who you have not highlighted in past editions of the block. So I'm going to start with you, Blake. Give me a freshman to watch this 2022 season.
Well, Texas A&M loaded up on the greatest freshman defensive line class in the history of college football on paper. And Walter Nolan is the top dog in that class. He is a guy that is a big, thick, powerful dude that can anchor and play, anywhere inside on the defensive line for Texas A&M. I expect him to make an instant impact. I cannot wait to see how A&M moves these guys around and what kind of defense they play. If I were them, I would play a bear defense like LSU did on the majority of my first and second down snaps, because they've got so many defensive linemen on their roster. They're going to have to find a way to keep all these guys happy with playing them, or they'll transfer. And so, but he's a guy that I think is going to make an instant impact. I think he'll immediately start off on their two deep and be in their rotation. He's a guy that can really disrupt inside, crush the pocket. And I'm really excited to see how he does this season, because I think he's got a really huge future ahead of him, and he's got a chance to be a really big time player in college football.
Blake, that was a great pick. He's one of the guys that I really love to see play when I turn the film on. I'm going to be tuned into him this year. Staying in the trenches, I'm going to go with Keontae Goodwin, offensive lineman at the University of Kentucky. I loved watching his tape last season. I loved watching him play in the All-American Bowl. He had a great spring at Kentucky. I know they've been trying to get a little weight off of him so he can move around a little better and get him in shape. But the word out of Kentucky is that he has all of the talent, probably is the most physically gifted guy on the team. I would expect that we see him playing very early in his career. He passed up. He could have went to Alabama. He could have went to Georgia. He could have went anywhere in the country he wanted to go. Pick Mark Stoops' Kentucky program. I think he's going to be a major factor in the SEC East for the Kentucky Wildcats this year.
Yeah, and he's with a very good offensive line coach, and Zach Yenzer. Zach's a guy I know pretty well. He's been in San Francisco as one of their assistant offensive line coaches, with around some of the best offensive linemen in the NFL the last couple of years. So I think he's got a chance to do a really good job developing him, and I expect him to, if he doesn't play a ton early on, eventually get in there and get developed, and he's going to have a very good career at Kentucky.
I like both picks a lot, and I like that we're rolling with the trenches. We got a defensive lineman and an offensive lineman. I'm going to stay in the trenches and head to the 40 acres because, Blake, man, Texas A&M signed easily the best defensive line class from last cycle, but Texas got easily the best offensive line class from this past cycle. And in it, obviously, DJ Campbell is the headliner, but just yesterday, the guy drawing the most rave reviews was none other than Kelvin Banks, the other five-star offensive lineman in that class. He entered the program in our database at 24/7 Sports around 6'5", 300. Looks like he's already added 20 pounds of weight. And then my guy Jeff Howe at Horns 24/7 said he looked arguably the most impressive of the newcomers. And Kelvin Banks is also working at left tackle to open camp when we expected him potentially to work on the right side. It is huge and imperative that Texas gets the most out of this freshman class along the offensive line, because if it can, the Longhorns could be lethal offensively. Blake, I'm really keeping an eye on Kelvin Banks as we prepare for whatever the Longhorns look like in 2022.
Yeah, he's got huge expectations. Texas fans are excited to have some offensive linemen that have a lot of potential for the first time in a long time. They've got a good group coming in. So I expect him to start early. I expect maybe one or two other freshmen to start before the season's over with. I think they've got a lot of talent. They've upgraded their offensive line. They've got one of the best offensive line coaches in the country in Kyle Flood there. So, I mean, they got everything working for them, have a huge opportunity, made a big mistake in not enrolling early. Those guys, all but one guy, one of their offensive linemen, waited till the summer to enroll, so that will set them back a little bit. But they're going to play. They're going to have a little trial by fire. I can't wait to watch the week 2 game versus Alabama. That will be an interesting test for the offensive linemen at Texas. They haven't seen players like they're fixing to see in the Big 12, like they're going to see week 2. So Sark will do a good job of keeping the pocket clean, hopefully, and get rid of the ball quick.
Well, I love that we're highlighting what I've heard a lot down in Austin, the big humans, as we talk about the freshmen to watch in 2022. But I do want to talk about, guys, who the big humans are protecting. Obviously, when we go into fall camp, everyone's talking quarterback battles. Everyone wants to know who's going to win the starting job for their respective programs. And Carl, I want to start with you for your intriguing QB position battle as we enter the season. You're heading out west, and I really like this pick here.
Well, everybody at Oregon is talking Bo Nix, but there's several people around the program that say Ty Thompson is the real deal and also deserves an opportunity. And so it's going to be interesting to me as the preseason continues and as we get into the first few weeks of the season, can Ty Thompson get any reps and can he push Bo Nix and get any time under center at the quarterback position? Ty Thompson was a special recruit coming into the University of Oregon and a big-time quarterback as well. I don't think that we can just sit back and crown Bo Nix just yet.
Yeah, I was real surprised how little Ty Thompson played last year. I think Oregon's quarterback situation last year wasn't an elite situation, in my opinion. But the coaches there obviously know more than I do. They're around the players, but I would have expected him to get a few more reps than he got. So I'll be looking forward to seeing him get on the field. I'm looking in the SEC at Ole Miss. I mean, Lane Kiffin has brought in Jackson Dart, who's a very talented player from USC. The Pac-12 defenses are going to look a lot different to him than the SEC defenses. He excelled had a couple of really good games last year against Washington State and UCLA, but those defenses are not like what he's fixing to see in the SEC West. So, Altmaier and him are going to have a very strong competition. When you bring a quarterback in out of the portal, they are expected to start. And so Altmaier, I like what he's saying. I like that he's keeping his mouth shut and he's going to work. He got in there last year in a tough situation when Matt Corral got injured in the bowl game and got a few reps, but that's going to be a really good battle. Lane Kiffin's got one of the best offenses in college football to play at as a quarterback. They're going to toss the ball around. So I expect a drop off either way from Matt Corral, but I think both of these guys are very talented and they're going to have a really tough, hard-nosed competition that could go into the season.
Luke Altmaier does not seem to be willing to just concede the job to Jackson Dart, and he gave one of my all-time favorite quotes in the words of the great Michael Jordan. When they brought Dart in, I took that personally. He took it personally, and so that has lit a fire up under him, and he's competing very hard. I'm interested to see how it all plays out.
I love it. I love that he's putting a chip, putting a chip on his shoulder and feeling disrespected by this. I think that's a good sign if you're an Ole Miss fan, that you've got two very motivated quarterbacks that want the job. And in today's day and age of college football and the transfer portal, no position is affected more in the portal than quarterbacks. And so when you've got a logjam of quarterbacks and you're not the guy, expect a lot of guys transferring. Ole Miss has got an ace in the hole that, as the rules state right now, Jackson Dart can't leave. So he's stuck there, win or lose. Altmaier would have an opportunity to transfer if he wanted to after the season, but you're going to see a ton of movement like you always do after this season, because there's some guys that just simply aren't going to play that could play on a different team at maybe a little bit lower level than they're at right now.
Subtly, one of my favorite storylines right now in college football is that in the SEC West, whether it's the fiery Luke Altmaier or the Nuss Bus, we've got guys at the quarterback position out there in the SEC West who are refusing to give ground to these incoming transfers, and I can't wait to see what happens during fall camp. But I'll tell you right now, subtly, one of my favorite things every day is getting to spend the day with these two. You should too. Like, share, subscribe, continue to help us build up the block. Check out 247sport.com for all things college football. And then, of course, we will see you back here, same time, same place next week. Gentlemen, it is always fun.